Hello and welcome to another episode of the Embodied Union podcast. I'm Lindsay.
I'm Charlie.
And today we're going to be talking about the different stages of relationship.
Yes, we're going to go through the one that is like the most commonly known, the honeymoon. The one that everyone has to deal with.
The conflict phase.
Probably doesn't have a name for. And then what can come after, if you have the right skills and tools, is moving into a really real and authentic love that I feel like doesn't really have an agenda.
Yeah, it's a real budding and blossoming, I sort of think. And I think too, there's one that we've just sort of thought about and talked about recently, which is the reverse honeymoon. So should we get into it?
So yeah, let's start there. There's a coach that we both really respect his work, and it's actually his concept, the reverse honeymoon. And this is now something I've adopted and I'm recommending to women that I work with, that when they first meet someone, spend 3 months actually just getting to know them, like going on dates, checking them out, having the focus be more on fun, and leave the erotic and the sexual and the sensual connection out of it for 3 months.
Yeah, don't muddy the waters with like an emotional cocktail. It's like a Molotov cocktail going off of, all like oxytocin, vasopressin, dopamine. It's like, it's already enough of a whoosh. If you're with someone that you really feel like is a yes, why add,
Well, I just think, especially, I'll speak for women, when we sleep with someone, and even if a woman tells me this is not true for her, I'll challenge it, because our body responds. I feel like when we are intimate with someone, there is a bond that occurs, and some form of attachment bonding that happens, and then we lose some of our objectivity because we've just getting to know someone. It's really exciting. Now there's this the lust is there, and that erotic connection, I think, can cloud our judgment a little bit. So I'm not judging anyone if they're meeting someone and sleeping together right away. I used to do that. I didn't used to think about this stuff, but what I know to be true is taking that time to just really suss out if this person's even a match with your values. Do you have the same kind of shared goals? Do you want the same things? Does their mission, is that something that excites you? What are they, really get to know someone, and then after 3 months of that, you can really make a really solid conscious choice to then step towards intimacy, which would then take people into what everybody knows, the honeymoon phase.
Yeah, well, I was going to say too, I was working with men so extensively, there's a tendency to want to secure the relationship by sleeping with the person.
Same with women.
Yeah, so, okay, well, if that's the case, then really supporting, in my work, it's supporting men in just reminding them that if this relationship is a yes for her and for you, what's the rush? What's the rush? Let it be. Enjoy each other, because you can't go back from that. You can't go back from being intimate with somebody. And I know for so many guys, it's there's just such a rush to, create that connection in that way. And I think it's probably is biological with the vasopressin and oxytocin and all that sort of chemical cocktail. But I really do believe that, if men can be more mature and just slow things down, mainly for themselves, would be, they'd get themselves in way less situations that I think that they're not quite ready for. I think often at times there's such a thirst or a desire to sleep with somebody, and then they realize, oh, I don't actually know if I like this person or not.
I think that happens all the time. I don't want to say majority, but I think lots of relationships, people are together simply because it's the next step. Once you've slept with someone, I've had it myself. It's just you meet someone, and I guess this is relevant for someone who's a little bit more codependent and anxious leaning, but you just go all in right away. You just love bomb each other right away. You don't even know that person. And then a couple of months down the track, it's oh. But you're already at that point, you're so invested on so many levels, your body is, attachment wise you are, emotionally. So I just think how can we just slow that down?
Yeah. Yeah. And the honeymoon. So yeah, I think this is where most people start, is like everything feels good. There's romance, there's connection, it's easeful. It's like the fairy tale is alive. It's like, oh, this person, they're the one. I've never felt this way. Feels like I've known you my whole life. You know, those sorts of concepts or thoughts.
And what's happening is the reason it's so intoxicating is purely because we are having the experience of being in connection without our childhood wounding online yet. So it feels like to our unconscious and to our nervous system, oh, I've finally met somebody who can, like, we feel more whole. And this person feels like they've created that, or they've given that to us. And that's part of the trap, you know, as you were saying, to bring the species together. We come together and we go all in and all of this stuff, but I don't know anyone who doesn't have emotional stuff that is going to bubble up. That's also why we want to slow it all down, so we can give it time to have stuff start to come up before we make this like really solid like investment of all in. You know, so the honeymoon, it feels like my stuff's just not activated and your stuff's not activated, and this is it. This must be it.
Yeah, and I think for so many people that aren't, in my opinion, aren't cultivating a conscious relationship and are just kind of going with what the other person is giving, I think for so many people is they start in a relationship and they're both putting their best face forward, best foot forward, and showing up as their ideal self, and the conflict's not really there yet. You know, everyone's on their best behavior. It's kind of like, you know, and for some they say 3 to 6 months. I think like 6 months to 18 months, you know.
For the honeymoon?
Yeah, depends.
I really think it varies. I think it can be as little as 1 week to 3 weeks, 3 weeks to 6 months, but then I have known people who are like 2 years. It's like, but the conflict phase, and it's a spectrum from like big conflict to just like little tense moments, but it's going to happen. The honeymoon will die for absolutely every couple, every relationship.
Yeah.
The honeymoon will die.
And I think in modern dating culture, it's that, oh, well, they're not the right one. If this isn't easy, it's meant to be easy, it's meant to be the fairy tale. So if it's not, and you're being difficult, or you're bringing up my stuff, but I'm throwing it back at you like it's your fault or you're the reason that this relationship's not good, I'm out. Because it was easy to get into this relationship, it's easy to get into the next one. I
think collectively, because it's very much that hookup culture, it's just like swipe next, what's next? And yeah, it's a real disservice to what's possible inside of a long-term emotionally committed relationship that does have periods of rupture and repair, and that is what creates the deepest intimacy. But yeah, I think a lot of people are just playing on the surface, and then when it's not it's like...
Yeah. This too is honestly, I believe, the best time to set up a relationship powerfully. Honeymoon. I mean, even in the reverse honeymoon, if you're that advanced in relationship, but to be fair... I think
reverse, like keep it chill, get to know each other, but like moving into honeymoon.
I think that, like, if you
well, you're really sleeping with them at that point, potentially. Yeah. So it's just like...
But I think, like, ultimately, if you're in that position of you're good together, you're feeling like this is working, this is really good, like, what a perfect time to really set the foundation of your relationship. This would be the time potentially to go to couples counseling or start to learn relationship skills before the conflict kicks off, knowing that it probably will. And this is just my idealistic thoughts around relationship and how to set it up the most powerfully before there's water under the bridge, before we go into the next phase, which is the conflict phase.
I think what I feel feels true would be in that honeymoon period, maybe not couples counseling, but unless you can find a good counselor who can teach you skills, because I think it's still in this like playful honeymoon energy. And I don't know, maybe it's just because we're both learners. It's like, us learning new relational skills or doing like a program or a weekend workshop or something that's like quite fun, like that just feels like something that could really match with the honeymoon, but you're actually being productive around learning these skills because most people weren't modeled them. And I think that is the time as well, the honeymoon, where you're setting agreements or you're really having big conversations around, well, what are your values? What are my values? Like life values, relationship values. What are your goals in life? Can we kind of see how that could work together? How would we support each other? Like, I feel like if you've done the reverse honeymoon, then the honeymoon really is that time where it's like there's a bit more depth around who are you and who am I and what do I want and what do you want, and just all of those really deep conversations, which I think then amplifies the physical intimacy that you're now enjoying inside of the honeymoon. But like really get to know someone now on an intimate level, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually.
Yeah.
And so I think everyone's really familiar with the honeymoon phase, and it feels fucking delicious. It's electric. It's just like, did he mean to touch me? Like sparks flying. Like it's such a beautiful part of relationship. And I think so many couples mourn it because they only know the honeymoon and what comes next, which we've called the conflict phase. I don't know that many couples who have gone beyond the conflict phase. So let's unpack the conflict phase.
Yeah, well, you know, usually I'm thinking for couples is they get together because they have like attraction, but what really holds them is their wounding, you know, together, which is sort of creates the conflict. It's, you know, where we're actually different and where we have different ideals or different thoughts or different assumptions about the other and have not set up agreements or boundaries. It's the part of the relationship, in my opinion, that starts to it needs more structure, you know. So the honeymoon period is like everything's just good and fun and it's easy, and then okay, now it's starting to need to do something, you know. And if it's not doing something, it's usually in conflict because we're not working together as a team to achieve something or build something together. So conflict will occur or happen naturally if there's a lack of boundaries and agreements.
And the reason that conflict happens is because, as I was saying, like in the honeymoon, your wounding is offline. You feel whole and you feel like this person's a part of why I feel so whole and so good. But as they become familiar, and as the novelty wears off, and as time goes on, then it's like the masks start to drop. You know, stuff that was parked starts to come out of the shadows and starts to bubble up. And none of us can avoid this. Like the conflict phase can be, like I said, it's a spectrum where it can be huge explosions. But for some people, like our conflict phase isn't crazy, but stuff comes up. Like you start to be a bit more defensive than you were. I start to take things more personally than I did. I'm aware of like my father wound a bit more. That went offline for 3 months, and you're wounding. And it's like, we really start to see these parts that have been dictating us our whole life. And that's why the conflict phase is such a beautiful opportunity, because it's letting us look at these parts that have been there beyond you. I had daddy issues before you came into my life, but now I have this another opportunity to look at them. And if you're operating more consciously and learning the right skills, the conflict phase is an opportunity to heal the deepest parts that you are carrying.
Yeah. And I think in that is like what it sounds like to me is saying that it's both individuals wounding that is bouncing up against each other.
Yes.
It's like my stuff is going to come up anyway, and you're going to maybe trip over it or trigger it off, so to speak. And it's like my mess. It's like I'm bringing my mess to this relationship, and whatever I've not dealt with, you're going to be impacted by. And the truth of it is like, I love you and you love me, but it actually it makes it harder for you to love me because my stuff's in the way.
And normally when people come together, there's an unconscious attraction to someone who does trigger your stuff, because that's us as humans being nature and seeking to heal by being the most attracted to someone who can activate our wounds so we can see them. So it's not a coincidence that our intimate partner is like one of the most triggering people that we have in our life. It's designed.
Can be. I feel like, I don't know what we did to do it, but it feels like, okay, there is stuff for both of us, but I don't feel like I've been in other relationship containers where the facilitator's talking about like the wounding and the drama and the this and the that. And I'm like, we're not doing that.
No.
You know?
But I think it's because, one, you've come with a lot of relational skills, and I have come in having done a lot of work on myself and really ready to integrate the skills that I hadn't actually put into practice.
Yeah.
So I think that it helps how much work we have done.
Yes.
That we are doing it differently. But the great thing is that we can now teach couples how they can do it differently, because you can. Even if you are coming in and you both are really triggered by each other's wounds, it's like you can still utilize that for your healing. Even the most toxic trauma bond, which trauma bonds can be an absolute nightmare of just trigger meeting trigger, wounding, constantly activating. But it's also, if you have the right skills, it's still a beautiful opportunity.
Definitely is. And I think this is where it goes to, I think, for some couples talking about this conflict phase, is for some relationships, that's the end.
That's the end. I think about this all the time. It's like they just get there. And because they don't have the skills, they're just constantly brushing things under the rug.
Next
and
one.
And it's like resentment, water under the bridge, until years later it's big breakdown, break up, cheating, affairs, whatever happens, because they never knew how to get through the conflict.
Or they didn't actually know when to leave.
Or they stayed
Yes.
and stayed and stayed and didn't have discernment, because their wounding is actually dictating whether they stay or go.
And that is another part of trauma bonding that I think some people don't fully recognize, and I didn't see it fully for myself, is around being codependent. And being codependent is actually one of the biggest reasons why you don't leave a relationship that is actually not serving you. Like, your partner might be breaking agreements or doing things that are like way out of your comfort zone, and yet for some reason you'll be staying thinking that, well, if I can show up a certain way, I can make it work, and those sorts of things. And it's like, the thing that you want to get is both parties need to be willing to repair and work on the relationship together. If it's only one, that is not enough.
I really want to like drive that home, you know, like if you're in a relationship and you are suffering, yes, you can work through it, but it takes both. You cannot one person cannot heal a relationship dynamic. It will not get better. If your partner is unwilling, it will not get better. So if you are staying, then you need to look at what it is about you that has you stay in a relationship that doesn't serve you. What like unconscious, shadowy need are you getting met? What is the like secondary gain? Like what are you getting out of it? What lesson do you need to learn so you can put that down?
That was huge for me in learning that for myself and having the discernment around my own codependency. And, you know, I think for a lot of people, that conflict phase, it's not to say, oh, well, because it's here, I'm just going to leave. It's like, okay, there is always going to be work to do.
Yes.
And am I willing to work on it? Are we making gains, or are we looping big time? And then it becomes, well, if we're looping and it's not working, or both parties aren't willing, that's when it could be a conversation. Because I think that for me has been one of the biggest pieces that I'm supporting men around, is like, is this working, or is this making it worse?
More damage. To both.
Yeah, exactly. And like, are we fighting for something that isn't worth fighting for, or it is? And I think that uncertainty is very difficult for people in relationship at that point, with water under the bridge, with attachment wounding, with codependency, with trauma bonding, like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, parent wounds, mother wounds, father wounds, the whole thing. I think there's a lot of work that goes into it. And the phase that comes after, if you're willing and do the work.
Before we jump into it, can we give a little bit more context on the conflict phase around the skills that actually help?
Yeah.
Like the actual value. Like if you're listening to this and you're in the conflict phase, it's like, well, fuck, tell us what to do. If you're telling us it can be a healing opportunity, to get to where Lindsay's going, this third phase, which is the authentic, juicy, real love. But you need to have communication skills like self-revealing. You have to be able to share your hurt and scared in a way with your partner that keeps them on your team. If I'm not being conscious, then I'm just going to feel my big feelings and I'm going to project them blindly onto you and make you wrong, and then you're going to get defensive, and then we enter into the trigger meeting trigger. And to get through the conflict phase, you have to recognize when your stuff is coming up and manage it with respect to yourself and to your partner and to your relationship. So like self-revealing is the one we go on and on and on about.
And we've done that in other episodes. So, and with that, making sure, just as a real basic way to think about it, is how can you validate yourself in your big emotions or your feelings, and then come to your partner and have them be validated by them.
Co-regulation.
Yes.
So self-regulate, validate, and then bring your stuff with respect. Learn how to co-regulate together.
Yes.
But I think co-regulation is such an art, because if I'm coming to you and I'm all pissed off and I'm just wanting you to make it better, which I know I've done to you at times, it doesn't go well. But if I'm coming to you and I'm being vulnerable and responsible and owning what's mine, you then are willing to co-regulate with me. So it's like how we share matters, how we share our big feeling matters.
Yeah, because feelings are not facts, but they are valid. It's valid to have big experiences and big feelings. And when we bring it to our partner, how can we both learn how to do that for each other, that we can validate that experience you're having? Doesn't mean that it's right. It's just,
You're having it.
And
it's painful. I see that you're suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, because that to me is probably one of the biggest ways that couples fall down over time and build resentment, is both of them are having bids of connection where they're coming home to each other after a big long day and wanting to debrief or talk it out or whatever it is, and it's not being met. It's being rejected somehow, where it's like, I'm wanting to connect and I'm not quite feeling like I can. So that's also like a covert conflict, where it's like, to me, it's still conflict, it's just not obvious. It's like a way that the relationship kind of falters by actually not being vulnerable or authentic and actually creating connection. It's like, it's not fighting, but it's also like not intimate.
Sounds like tense still. It's like needs not being met, lack of reciprocity.
Yes.
Like there's nothing more defeating, and I've had it with you, not often, but when you make a bid for connection and it's not met, and you're just like, oh. And it feels,
or your dreams every night.
In my dreams, you do not meet my bids for connection. But I think...
So self-revealing was one?
Self-revealing, co-regulation, self-regulation, knowing how to hold space, being an active listener, reflecting back, validation, and as well as being... That's all what we do that's the relationship skills. But to move through the conflict phase as well, you have to be invested in your own internal work.
Yeah.
And that looks like going to therapy, joining a men's group, having women in your life that don't just back up your victim, women that can help you be responsible and see maybe it is a good women's circle, but getting your own support with your own internal landscape.
Oh yeah, self-responsibility.
We're in therapy, we go and do things separately, and we have a therapist that we see together. Lindsay's in men's work. It's like we are taking care of ourselves, and then we're taking care of our relationship. And honestly, I don't think you said this, when we had our first bump in the first 6 months,
for sure,
we went straight to therapy. We took it straight to therapy. And it's the best thing we ever did, because we have no resentment. There's no water under the bridge. We have tense moments and conflict, but there's nothing that I'm holding on that's just that time you did that thing. It's it's clean.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing for, I'm sure people have their judgments about us and our relationship, and we only show the best parts. But I wish if we showed you our best parts, we'd be banned from every platform. But it's it is like this. We are like this. We do have moments of tension, but we don't have tension between each other. We have our own stuff. I'm so aware that my stuff, I don't leak it into this relationship. And I don't feel like you do the same.
I think we do our best. We do our best. We're still really human. And if external stresses are really high, then we can have our moments of just being human. But like, we really try to not make the other responsible. We really try to just, I still lean on you,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to let this project out onto you and damage this relationship because I care too much.
Yeah.
This is the one that I want to work and I know better. So I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a willingness with that. And I think, so that definitely comes to that phase.
That's the conflict phase. That's what it sounds like, looks like, feels like, and that's kind of what you need to be willing to lean into to move through it, to get to the next phase, which is...
Well, there's lots of names for it, but it's like the authentic love phase.
I think authentic love really captures it. It's just...
Macy Day does call it the re-enchantment. So there's enchantment, disenchantment, re-enchantment.
Yes, I like that too.
Hakomi, teacher.
Therapy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's this space that's like really, like, okay, I have a question. Do you think that we have landed there fully?
Feels like it to me. Just feels like really relaxing. Like it feels like there's an ease about our relationship, I don't feel like we've been through a conflict phase, so to speak, where it's ongoing or water under the bridge. There's things that pop up, but I just feel like...
Like, we're definitely not in the honeymoon phase, and we definitely have moments of conflict, and we definitely work through them well and together and without damaging anything.
We also do have like life goals together and things that we want to achieve together, and our, like embodied union, our company, our baby, so to speak, is something. And it's like we've lived together,
traveled together.
Yeah, it's like all the things, and it's knowing that we have a future together that we're working towards and planning towards. And that to me is like, that's what holds a relationship, is like not just shared ideals, but actually building something together. Like, what are we actually creating that's bigger than our relationship? I think that's the other thing as well. Yeah. When you start to show up in a way in community or with others and, build that together. That's, to me, that's what authentic love is. It's like there's a knowing that we're making something of this and that we're both, both leaning in.
And I think it's really like, at this point, you've really seen the other person. Like, I've seen your wise man and your king, and I've seen your little boy. And I love all of them,
Lucky you.
All of these parts. And like, there's parts of you that trigger me and that really hit up against my wounding. Like, we definitely have parts that really do clash. But I feel like I've seen those parts. And if that's what you got, Lindsay Beister, I'm still all in. I'm still here, all in. There's nothing you've got that I'm like, not willing to hold you in and like hold myself in. Yeah. So I think that's that authentic place where it's like the fantasy has died and we know what we're in for and we're both still a yes.
Yeah.
And we're willing to move through the conflict with respect, knowing that it's still going to come. And like you said, we have bigger, if you zoom out, we have goals that are bigger than us. We have things that we're working towards that are bigger than just you and me. And it's like, that feels really good. We're both on the same page with that. So, yeah, I think this real love space, authentic love, is just, there's a real knowing that, like, I know you're human and I know you're wise man. And I'm a yes for both.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I've spoken to this in other areas, but it's just that safety, respect and trust being the foundation.
Yes.
And then to me, it's like a pyramid. So it's agreements, boundaries, values, intimacy, love. And if that's authentic love that sits on top, that makes sense to me. Just that all these things in place hold the structure and the integrity of our relationship such that it feels really solid. It's got, the wider the base, the bigger the peak. So to me, it's just like we've got a solid foundation that we've built through this time together, and it's like, okay, this is what we're going to next. This is what we're creating. It's not passive. I think that's the thing too, that I think for so many people, they're sitting in their relationship in a way that's passive.
Yes.
Like the length of time in a relationship, although it can be quite amazing and beneficial, and I've done that, a 2-decade relationship, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good one, you know? So not saying that time is the king, but it's like the active participation of both people in
Quality over quantity.
Absolutely, you know, and I think that's really important way to think about it as well. Is like, how active are we in our relationship, of making sure that there isn't weeds in it and there isn't water under the bridge. And if there is, it's like we're not pushing that under the rug. We're actually like willing and vulnerable enough to lean into what is uncomfortable, to make sure that we're doing it when it's there rather than later. Because it's like anything. It's like leaving a dirty pan in the sink. It's like, clean it while it's still hot. You know, it'll come off way easier than leaving it till later. Then it turns into a way bigger job. And I think they're the things that we were talking about before, as far as leaning in with bits of connection, really working on the relationship so there isn't that tendency for a relationship to fall flat. That's really it.
I just want to add as well around this place that you're describing, or this version of relationship you're describing, that really sounds like super solid, really secure, the safety is there. It's like, even like all of that is so beautiful, and it does lay the foundations for like the experience that we're having, which is great. But it also is like the fertilizer for some of our deepest core material or wounding to come up. Like when the relationship gets that solid and that safe, it really allows us to access some parts of ourselves that we couldn't get to in a more tumultuous relationship, because we're kind of just stuck on the surface, like fighting about what are the peers like, you know? Like if I'm triggered, then you're triggered, then I don't actually get an opportunity to access why I'm even triggered and like what's going on deeper. But if we're in this really safe, solid relationship, then when triggers come up, as they still do, we can actually go deeper with it. Like a secure relationship will still bring up stuff, but it's the way you manage it that actually can be so deeply healing. I honestly think that we can do some really solid healing work on our own, but the quickest way and the most effective way to heal our childhood or any unhealed parts is to get into a solid relationship, a secure relationship, and just like learn this stuff, go all in. Like I work with women, I can teach them all the skills, but I always tell them that this is still the training ground. You know, when you get in your next relationship, that's when you need to apply what I'm sharing with you, because that's where it's actually like the biggest growth happens inside the relationship, where you're both like, let's go.
Yeah. And that's the thing, relationship is for growth. It really is. But it's not, you got to be able to discern what is growth and what is just hurting.
Yeah.
You know, each other, and making sure that there's, you know, there's a boundary and there's a line that you can create and make and agree on with each other. You know, and I think that's really important.
And I think the way to know if your relationship is either just growing or just hurting, it's like there's willingness for resolution. It's like you have conflict, but quite quickly you reach clarity, and something feels different. And there's a leaning in. Like if I've had women ask me before, but I think this is for my growth, and they describe the dynamic, and it's like, not at all. It's like, this is just like trauma meeting trauma, and there's no repair happening, and there's no willingness, and it's actually very toxic.
Yeah, well, my thought around that is that if you notice there's a loop and you can't reconcile that loop, that's going to be that's going to become a factor.
You go and get outside eyes on it.
Oh, absolutely. Because the thing is, like what I notice, like what works is that if we have something come up more than once and we go and get it sorted, it's then not a thing anymore. It's almost like you actually forget. This is the thing with healing and healing loops in relationship. When you get out of the loop, you forget you ever had them. You're like, I don't even remember us fighting about that, because we just don't anymore. It's actually healed.
I think it's like when you heal anything, you know, like I've had even physical issues in my body where I'm like, when I heal this fucking thing, it's going to be the best day. We're going to have a party. I'm going to be so happy that I finally heal it. And then it just does heal. And then it's down the track. I'm like, oh, what's that thing that I used to be really upset about? It's like the healing is so subtle and you just start showing up differently. Like in relationship, it's like, I can't believe we used to even have that thing. I can't even like really try that on anymore. It feels weird. But yeah. You just forget about it. That's when you know you've truly healed something. You forget about it.
And I guess the thing here is like, it's always just micro changes over time, little wins, little changes. It doesn't have to be this groundbreaking, amazing, transformational piece that will happen in relationship. It's not going to probably be one thing or one weekend or one book that you read. It's many things over a period of time.
It's long-term, if not lifelong practice.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's why anyone that's listening who's been in a relationship for 20 years and is like, fuck, we didn't have any of these skills and there's so much water under the bridge, I want you to know that if you're both willing, you can absolutely transform even that dynamic. You absolutely can. We've seen it.
Yep.
It happens.
Yep.
But
some of our first couples were like that and we did it, you know, and that's why we know the work that we do works, you know.
Because it works for every stage of relationship.
Yeah. And if you've got, you know, if you're in a relationship and you've got kids, and there's that dynamic as well, as like really doing it for each other in service to your children.
Because you're modeling to them. They're going to go and repeat your relationship patterns. It is your responsibility to model something different to them.
Absolutely.
And they are witnessing and downloading from earlier than you think.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Absolutely. So,
do you feel like that covers all three? We've got reverse honeymoon, moving into honeymoon, conflict, and the authentic love piece. I think just one last thing, it's like when you hit that authentic love piece, conflict is still kind of bouncing back, like tension, and then periods where it's just super smooth sailing, but something comes up. It's not about getting rid of tension altogether. It's just changing your relationship to tension and how you navigate it.
Yeah, and I think in that it's like the polarity piece as well, just around that is just like knowing that that's then something that you're managing and tending to.
What's the polarity piece?
Well, just when you move into, I believe when you move into authentic love, it's that you're not using conflict to create polarity. It's actually like you know how to fuel source your relationship from a place of like co-regulation. Some of the things that you said earlier just dropped my mind right now, but it was just knowing how to create co-regulation and authentic connection in the relationship, and then utilizing polarity to continue to drive and generate the relationship.
I think this is a really important point. If I'm just reading between your lines, it's often couples get stuck in the conflict phase, and we can also call it the fighting and the fucking phase, because it's actually what drives the intensity, which drives the drama, but it drives the intimacy.
Yes.
So when you're moving into that real authentic love, I think this is what you're saying, you want to know how to utilize polarity to inspire the relationship and the passion and the play and the intimacy, rather than having to rely on the conflict. Like so many couples don't even realize they're utilizing conflict to get their rocks off as well. And I know I've done that in my relationship. And so once you've healed a lot of this stuff, it's like, now how do we create our intimacy polarity, which is utilizing the masculine and feminine energies to bring them together to create, it's like a fuel source for arousal. And if you guys are listening and you're like, I want to know how to do that, we teach you that too. And it's something that we're in the practice of as well, and it's beautiful.
Absolutely. That's heaps for me today.
I think so. That was great. Anyway, if you guys want to know more about this work, you can find us. I am Charlie S. Hannah on Instagram.
Lindsay B. Instagram.
Embodied Union. Find us through the podcast or socials. And we'll catch you next week.
Love you, Critter.
I love you.